That's somebody calling my phone, but it's supposed to be unmuted. Okay, we are ready. Hello, everybody. We're going to begin. Just make sure this is recorded in case somebody wants to watch it. Okay, they should be joining on Zoom. We'll see. George is here. What you got around your neck? A snake? Okay, so we are on page 2A, if you're following the original. If you are at the back here in the English, what page are we on?
197.
197 in the middle, but the words of a Rabbi Shmuel. You have a link in your text message, by the way.
Yes.
And I think it's number 13 there. Okay, so let's recap. Who remembers? It's been a long time, a whole week. A lot has happened in the last week. Let's try to remember. We studied the Mishnah. The Mishnah made a ruling. The ruling was that you can read the Megillah. Ordinarily, the Megillah is the 14th or the 15th, the 14th for regular cities, the 15th for the walled cities. Special dispensation was given for villagers. They can read sometimes on the 11th or 12th or 13th, and meaning earlier than the festival day, which is a strange thing, but that's how it is. And the reason for that was because to give them a chance when they come into the city on Mondays and Thursdays to hear the Megillah then. Okay, so the Gemara we studied last week said Minola. The Gemara said, from where do you know that from? Right? What's the source? What's the scriptural source? So the Gemara said, what do you mean the scriptural source? The whole thing, the whole festival was enacted and devised by the rabbis. So the Gemara says, yeah, but the original rabbis, the men of the Great Assembly who came up with the laws of the festival must have also found some kind of, if not scriptural proof, at least some kind of scriptural, something called a source, a raya, a source. And sometimes you don't have an exact source, but you have what's called an asmachta. You have like an allusion in the text, something you can rely on. So we said yes, because we have one. What did we identify? That the Megillah says, L'kayem, to fulfill this festival, bizmanehem, in their times. And the Gemara says, what a strange word. It could have said bizman, it could have said bizmanam. What does it say? Bizmanehem. So zmanam is the 2 times of the 14th and the 15th. Zmanehem is a more inclusive one. And we're including another 2 days, just like the original enactment is for 2 days. So the additional inclusion is another 2 days. Which 2 days are those? The 11th and the 12th. Maybe it's the 12th and the 13th. No, the 13th we don't need any proof for or any support for, because the 13th is obvious. 13th is the day of the victory of the battle, the day of the fast of Esther. Everyone knows it would make sense the 13th, but the 11th and the 12th were the added days. Maybe the added days should be after the 15th, maybe 16th and 17th. So we said, no. The Megillah says, V'lo ya'avor. V'lo ya'avor can mean a number of things, but in this context, it means no later. Earlier, but not later. So the latest is the 15th, as the Megillah says, but you can go earlier, and we added 11th, 12th, and 13th. Yes?
Just a correction. The 11th would be the earliest that you would need to go to in order to always have a case where...
11th is the earliest, yes. If Purim falls out on Sunday, then Thursday is the 11th.
Right, so forget about, I forgot the word we were using. Bizmanehem.
Bizmanehem.
Even if you didn't have that at all, if you just want to say, well, what's the earliest that you would need to go to in order to make every day of the week if you need to?
So your logic is correct, but the Gemara said we're not satisfied with logic. We want to know that there's an actual proof for this in the text. Right?
So the proof is right there.
Why don't you go further? Maybe we should allow the Megillah to be read the entire month.
But you wouldn't need to. You only need to do these days. If you couldn't do the 11th, then there could be a situation where it falls on a day of the week where the piece doesn't allow. You can't say on the other.
Right. So the logic dictates that we should give them this convenience. But at the same time, what if somebody calls me and says, Rabbi, I really can't have the Seder on the 15th of Nisan because we're traveling or whatever. Can I have the Seder? Because, and for a valid reason, so to speak, I would say logic says you're correct, except that we can't do that. You have to have a source for that. And that's what we were exploring. So what we're going to do now, I want to give a little introduction into today's class, because now we're going to if we get as far as I'm going to try to get to, is today you're going to have a real Gemara experience. Today you're going to have to really keep your head on your shoulders, and you're going to, besides the content of what we're going to learn, you have to stay with the flow. There's a flow here. There's going to be a number of different opinions suggested and questions asked and resolutions given, and then going back, and you're going to have to really keep your head on your shoulders, and that is part of the amazing experience. So the first thing we're going to do is to bring a second source, right? Because there can't be ever one opinion. There has to always be at least two opinions.
When you say, is it an opinion or is it a source?
Well, a second opinion about what the source is for the Mishnah to rule that we can read earlier than the 14th. So the first source we gave in the name of Rabbi Shimon, was from the word Bizmanehem. Yeah. Now, we're up to a second opinion. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani Omar. Yeah? Your book is coming? Huh?
I think so.
You think so? Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Nachmani, says, no, I disagree with the whole teaching of Bizmanehem. I have a different suggestion. Omar Kura, the verse in the Megillah says, Kayamim asher nachu bahem ha-Yehudim, like in the days where the Jews rested and celebrated. If you recall the original text of the Megillah, I'm going back to pages where they have the original text. So I think it's there. Yeah, look at the second paragraph. It says, the Jews confirmed, took upon them and upon their seed and upon all who joined themselves to them, and it shall not pass, or that's the word, it shall not pass, that we said you can't go later than the 15th, that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing, according to their time, that's the word Bizmanehem, according to the time, in every year, and that these days should be remembered and observed throughout every generation. Actually, I was joking, that's not the one that we're talking about over here. I can't find them.
Here that the translation here is to the time, not to the times.
9:22. Oh, here it is. What? Yeah, that's in their time. Oh, it's actually a mistake. I mean, it should be the times, plural. Correct. Good point. If you go back to the end of the first paragraph, I'm on page 193. We have the original verses from the Megillah. So it says, and Mordechai wrote, fourth line, Mordechai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews that were in all the provinces of the king Achashverosh, both near and far, to enjoin them that they should keep the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the same in each and every year, as the days on which the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month that was turned for them from sorrow to gladness, etc. What does it mean, as the days on which the Jews rested from their enemies? Kayamim, as the days. So Shmuel says as follows. The verse could have said Yamim, the days that they rested. Why does it have to say Kayamim, as the days? Ka, like the days. That kaf, which is unnecessary, is telling you to include something else. Yamim, the days which they rested from the victory of the war, is the 14th and the 15th in the cities of the walled cities. That's Yamim, that's regular days. Kayamim, and now we're just like in the days, meaning we're adding something new. We're adding another 2 days, and that comes l'rabot, that comes to include the Achad Asar or Shnei Masar, the 11th and the 12th. Remember, because I know Ryan's itchy to ask a question, like, why does Kayamim imply that? And if you're adding days, why only 2 days, etc., etc. So we're not really approaching this with complete our human logic, because our human logic is in fact not the tools to use to interpret the Torah. And there must be, this is certainly a subject to interpretation, but the method of interpretation is one that is received by tradition. And these rabbis, Rabbi Shmuel, has such a tradition, and he knows that the kaf is an inclusionary letter, and he knows that it's including the amount of days as included in the original words. The original words, Yamim, is 2 days, so the kaf is including another 2 days, the 11th and the 12th.
Maybe it's double.
Kaf kaful. So 2 and 2, you're saying, yeah. I mean, the logic we had earlier when it could have said zmanam, and instead it says zmanehem. We said zmanehem dumya de zmanam. Zmanehem is the same as zmanam. Just like zmanam means 2, so the zmanehem is an additional 2. So when you're comparing one to the other, you're adding the same amount as the original word. So now we have a source for the 11th and the 12th. The next couple lines is going to be familiar. It's the same logic that we mentioned in the previous proof. The Gemara asks, how do you know 11th and 12th? Maybe it's the 12th and the 13th. Amar Shmuel Bar Yitzchak, Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Yitzchak, taught, as we mentioned this earlier, because it's the same question answered before. Shloisa, on the 13th, Zman Kehil Lakoli is a day of gathering for all. It's the day of the actual victory of the war. But it would not need a special inference from the verse to actually include that. So therefore, that's obvious. So we're adding 2 other days, and that's the 11th and the 12th. If you're adding 2 days, maybe it's the 16th and the 17th after the 15th. So the Gemara says, if we said it shall not pass, you cannot add more days after the 15th. The same sort of methodology, the same question and answer on the previous proof is now being applied to this proof also. And now we have the conclusion of the second proof, the proof of Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Nachmani. Rabbi Shimon told us, we're learning that from the word zman, zmanam, zmanihem. And Rabbi Shmuel says, no, yamim kayamim. It should have said yamim. Why the extra kayamim? An additional 2 days. The Gemara asks, and this is going to be a question that some of you will, or the response will be some of you will feel better after you've learned this, I think. The Gemara asks, we have 2 proofs here. Why did one not learn like the other? Why did Rabbi Shimon not learn from the Yamim Kayamim proof? Why did Rabbi Shmuel not learn from the Zman, Zmanam, Zmanihem proof? Why was each one dissatisfied with the other and had to bring their own proof? Why does Rabbi Shmuel, why is it not sufficient for him to learn out from the word of Zman, Zmanam, Zmanihem? So what does he answer? He says, Zman, Zmanam, Zmanihem loy mashmalei. He's not very bothered by this word Zmanihem. He doesn't feel that that's really an issue, a thorn to highlight, to say, oh, Zmanihem, it shouldn't have said Zmanihem, it should have said Zmanam. To him, that whole breakdown of the word, which is something that somebody mentioned last week, I believe, Zmanihem, Zmanam, it's not such a big deal. And Rabbi Shmuel says, I agree, it's not such a big deal. It's not enough that I would use that to learn that the Megillah is adding 2 additional words over here. Now, by the way, I want to mention something about this whole discussion that we're having. As we're reading it, it feels like that we haven't, at the time of the writing of this text, the publishing of this work, it feels like we have Rabbi Shmuel sitting on one side of the table, Rabbi Shimon sitting on the other side of the table, and each one saying their opinion, and we're asking, why didn't you agree with him? Why don't you agree with him? And each one is answering. But that's absolutely not what happened. I don't even know if Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Shimon ever saw each other, ever knew each other. I don't even know if they lived in the same time. I'm not sure offhand. This is what's genius about the way the Gemara is composed. This is many years later, the authors of the Gemara, who are Ravina and Ravashi, this is 6th century, Bavel, have collected centuries of teachings from different yeshivot. So they collected, somebody gave them a manuscript of a class that was once given by Rabbi Shimon, and he taught that we learned the 11th and the 12th from the word Zmanihem. They have that whole manuscript. A few weeks later, a new manuscript came in the mail. It was a teaching from a few centuries ago, different place, different time from Rabbi Shmuel. He taught it from Yamim Kayamim. And now we're putting this together. So we're quoting one opinion, quoting another opinion. And then we are creating this discussion between the two. This discussion about why didn't you learn like him and you like him is being had centuries after these guys were even alive. And we're saying, your answer, why you didn't learn like him? It's not your answer. You're not even here to answer. You're not even alive anymore. It's later generations who were comparing these opinions, and they were giving voice to why perhaps did Rabbi Shmuel not learn like Rabbi Shimon, or Rabbi Shimon not like Rabbi Shmuel. So keep in mind, even though it sounds like it's all happening in live stream, it's not. It's all sort of being animated in this kind of way. So Rabbi Mashma implies, what does it say over here? He says he does not learn anything from them. Mashma'ut means something of substance, of meaning. It's not a substantial enough awkwardness in the word to really call our attention and say we should be learning something from here. Like mashma, it's not. Very often in yeshiva, somebody gives a suggestion about something, and you say, "It's not mashma." That's an expression, meaning I don't see this anywhere. I don't feel this anywhere. I don't see. It's not. That's not the underlying message of the word or of the. That's not mashma. So Rabbi Shmuel says, I don't care for that teaching. What about Rabbi Shimon bar Abba? Why did he learn from Zman Zmanim and he did not learn from Yamim Kayamim? My time Kayamim. Why didn't he use the limud, the teaching from the extra kaf, the word Kayamim? So he says a very simple answer. Amalacha, he says, that word of Kayamim is actually not a strange word. It's actually not an anomaly. It's actually needed for a very important teaching. And the teaching is that the festival of Purim should not only be celebrated in that year when Mordechai and Esther enacted the celebration, but rather it should be a celebration le dorot, for generations to come. If you look at the original text, right, Mordechai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews to celebrate the 14th and the 15th. And he says, as the days on which the Jews rested from their enemies, etc., they should make them days of feasting and gladness. It's an instruction, not for this year, for next year and the year after, and for all the years to come up until today. How do we know that when they created this festival, it wasn't just for that year? From this word, kayamim, like in the days that it was celebrated originally, so too it should be continued to be celebrated in the generations to come. So Rabbi Shimon says kayamim is not an available word to be interpreted for other things. Rabbi Shimon says kayamim is a strange word. What's it for? Could have said yamim. Why kayamim? So it's telling us something, and we're going to learn the 11th and the 12th. Rabbi Shimon argues and says it's not an available word. It's clearly teaching about something else, and that is the importance to celebrate Purim in years to come. Yeah.
The first quote says each and every year, and the second one says throughout every generation.
Where are you reading? In the original, okay, so
The 14th day and the 15th.
So you're saying in a later verse, it actually says it more explicitly, the instruction for every generation, which means you're asking a question. You're saying, you, Rabbi Shimon, just told me that Kayamim is not available to interpret for the 11th and the 12th, because Kayamim is teaching me about the importance to celebrating future generations. Ryan's asking, it's not true. There's a later verse, a few psukim later, that says clearly these days should be remembered and observed throughout every generation. So if I have a clear instruction there, I don't need Kayamim to teach me that. Probably that is what Rabbi Shmuel is going to respond to. Right, we're going to create our conversation further now, because the Gemara stops here, but we can go further. What's Rabbi Shmuel going to respond to Rabbi Shimon's question? Rabbi Shimon said, I disagree with Kayamim, it's not available. Rabbi Shmuel responds, it is available. You know why it's available? Because a few verses later, there's a clear instruction about every generation. And therefore, I don't need Kayamim to teach me that. Therefore, Kayamim is available to interpret additional days, the 11th and the 12th.
So you're saying that this discussion
Kayamim, Rabbi, in modern Hebrew means existed, permanent.
Give me a verse, an example.
David Melech Israel Chai v'Kayam.
Lo, that Kayamim, Kaf, Yud, Mem, Yud, Mem.
That's right.
Lo, Kuf, Kaf.
It existed.
Lo, Kuf, Kaf.
Oh, Kayamim,
Ken.
yesterdays.
Ken.
Yes, you're right.
Ken.
Right. Sorry.
Huh? Lando?
you're saying that this whole discussion never took place.
Not between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Shmuel. It took place by generations later of students who were analyzing these manuscripts in previous generations. It's almost like if I presented to you today an opinion from a great rabbi from 100 years ago, and I presented here a second opinion, an opposing opinion from another rabbi from 80 years ago, and now we're going to analyze his opinions, and we're going to ask the question, why did he say not like this and like this, and we're going to offer solutions, and imagine the summary of this class. We created the conversation between them.
But without, do you think without changing their original meaning, like preserving their original intention?
Well, what we're doing is we're not altering their opinion. Rabbi Shimon says clearly he learns from Kayamim, from Bizmanihem. Rabbi Shmuel learns from Kayamim. We are questioning, why did one not use the other? And we're offering suggestions or solutions.
Because analyzing the conversation.
Yes.
But when one of those said, okay, we accept the 11th, right? Because this explanation why during a period of time they did ever use the 11th?
The law about the 11th is the law. No one's disputing that. The question we're having here is, what's the source of this law? This is all like a kind of a theoretical, not a theoretical, this is all a legal theory conversation. The law, no one's disputing the law. We're just trying to figure out where did it come from.
It came from them understanding the stars and
It came from
time, and they knew that
they had to have a basis. They had to have a basis to create this law. It's a very important concept today. If you have kind of shallow thinking, you'll say, yeah, the rabbi said the law is as follows. No. Fine, let's not dispute the law. But I want to know why. And I want to know from where did you get it from? And I want to dig deep into the legal theory behind this. And I want to know why you chose to learn it from this verse and not from that verse. And I want to know why this was your proof and not that was your proof. That's what the Gemara is doing all the time, which gives you an appreciation into getting deep into the heart and soul of every single legal application. That's what the Gemara is. The Mishnah, if you want to study Mishnah, you asked about Mishnah a few weeks ago. Mishnah is an easier study. Tell me the law. Let me hear. The Gemara says, okay, now I want to take my gloves off. I'm not disputing the law, but I want to know what's going on. Where does this come from? Give me more. Let's get deep. That's what we're doing over here. Okay. Up until now, we have now concluded that we have two separate sources for this ruling of the Mishnah that the villagers can read either the 11th, the 12th, or the 13th, which is before the festival day. Right? Okay. Now we're going to get into an interesting discussion about this law. Not about the source per se, but about the actual law. The law told us, strange thing, you don't have this by any other festival, that on Purim you could fulfill a mitzvah even before the actual festival day. On Pesach you can't eat matzah before Pesach starts, on Rosh Hashanah you can't blow shofar, but on Purim you can read Megillah. Okay. Who says this? Meaning, take a step back. Who's the author of our Mishnah? Go back to the Mishnah. Who's the author?
The Great Assembly?
I guess the Great Assembly is the original creators of the festival of Purim, the law of Purim. When it came to the Mishnah is many centuries after the Great Assembly, and Rebbe is quoting this opinion that the Megillah can be read. We want to know who is the Megillah can be read 11th, 12th, 13th. It's for the villagers because the villagers is a dispensation for them to come under theirs. Who's the author of this Mishnah? Who's saying this? So very often have a Mishnah quotes. Rabbi Yeshua says this, Rabbi Gamliel says this, right? Which name is quoted in our original Mishnah? You found the name there? No name. Our Mishnah is what's called a Stam Mishnah, an anonymous Mishnah. Very often, Rebbe writes an anonymous Mishnah. Why would he write an anonymous Mishnah? And who is this anonymous person? So here's a beautiful general teaching, but we're going to really dissect it. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba, the grandson of Chana, said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Zu divrei Rabbi Akiva stim ta'a. This anonymous ruling is in fact Rabbi Akiva. We have a principle, Stam Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva. Whenever you have an anonymous ruling, it's Rabbi Akiva. You know why? Give you a bit of an example. Don't want to be offensive to anybody. Although sometimes, let's say I say now, I want to tell you a teaching of the Rebbe. So I say that. Which Rebbe am I referring to? Right? It could be hundreds, thousands, right? But in 2021, in America or most of the world, when you say, I want to teach the teaching of the Rebbe, I think most people would have in mind one person. Right? Normally, that would be the word to use for the Lubavitcher Rebbe. In many circles, if you say, I want to teach you a teaching of the Rav, you know who the Rav is? Maybe Rav Soloveitchik, right? Once upon a time, before Rav Soloveitchik's times, there's a Shulchan Aruch called Shulchan Aruch HaRav. Who used to be the Rav? There used to be a Stam Rav. Everyone knew Shulchan Aruch HaRav is who is the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. He was also referred to as the Rav. There were certain great rabbis and tzaddikim that received such notoriety, if that's the right word, that you didn't have to mention their name. Come in. Hello? Good. You didn't have to mention their name. It just, you knew who they were, right? Rabbi Akiva was one of those rabbis. If I have to say an opinion of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yehuda, I have to mention the names. And I'm just saying a regular opinion of Torah, everyone knows that's Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, and he's somebody you're probably going to hear from me a lot because I like to talk about him a lot, because you see the Mishnah talks about him a lot. Rabbi Akiva was a hero. A hero's hero. Rabbi Akiva, I'll tell you something interesting. I'm going to say a few things about him over the class today. But normally we have a principle when we're rolling halachic methodology. There's a rule, Yachid v'Rabim. What if you have an opinion of an individual and an opinion of many? Right? 5 rabbis hold one thing. 1 rabbi holds something else. What's the law? Let's say you have a bet din. But you always want to have a bet din, have an odd number of judges. 1, 3, 5, 7, etc. Always an odd number. Why? Because you want to have a rabbim, you want to have a plural, you want to have a majority opinion. Because the rule is you always go after the majority opinion. The Torah, that comes from the Torah. The Torah says, Acharei Rabim Lahatot. You always go after the majority opinion. And therefore you have to have an odd number of judges. By the way, I mentioned 1. I mean, theoretically you could have a bet in of 1 person. Let's say 2 people come to 1 rabbi and they say, we want you to be the dayan, the judge, to adjudicate a case between us. Can that 1 individual rabbi do it? Of course. He could, but the Mishnah says we don't like when rabbis serve as a dayan alone. Should always see at least minimum of 3 people. Why? Because only 1 person or only 1 thing rules alone. Hashem.
But if him and I want to come to you and say, hey, can you resolve a dispute between us?
So actually you used the key word there. You said resolve. And there's many ways to resolve, I guess, disputes. In the language of the Gemara, there's one way is the din, the law. One way is the pshara, is the compromise. We can rule any bet din can operate in one of 2 ways. You can figure out and discover the exact legal application, the legal ruling here, or you can pursue a path of compromise. And actually, the preferred way is to pursue a path of compromise. What a compromise means and what the legal ruling means, okay, I don't want to get into that now. So compromises, but if we were going to try to figure out the exact law over here, it should be a minimum of 3 people. That's always the preference. Okay, there's an exception to this rule about majority opinion. And that is, what if Rabbi Akiva is 1 opinion on his own and 5 rabbis are arguing with Rabbi Akiva? What's the law? Halacha k'Rabbi Akiva v'chaveiro. The law is always like Rabbi Akiva against his colleagues, plural. He's the kind of guy that the buck stops here.
Even if there were generations later or more? Or
Generations later, we already learned last week that a later court cannot uproot the ruling of an earlier court unless they're greater in number and in wisdom. But there are exceptions to this rule. There are exceptions if it was one of Rabbi Akiva's teachers, like Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Tarfon. They were some of his teachers. Maybe if you can't rule against these teachers. But in general, especially later rabbis and scholars, the law is always like Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva is this. Rabbi Akiva is held in a different pedestal than all other rabbis. You want to hear a beautiful explanation? Actually, the author, Rabbi Steinsaltz, I once heard this from him in person. Right? He once came to the yeshiva and he was talking to us. Allah Shalom, he passed away a year and a half ago. And he said something very beautiful. He said, you know what was unique about Rabbi Akiva? Until 40, he couldn't read Hebrew. He was totally illiterate. He was far from a scholar. And at 40 years old, he starts to discover how to read and then to how to learn. So he's introduced to Torah scholarship literally in his 40s and his 50s. Which means as follows. He is introduced for the first time to Torah scholarship as a mature person. Most or all of the other sages, they were born into it. Raised, they went to yeshiva day school, their home, their father, their mother, every Shabbos table, they were born into it. Nothing wrong with that. It's a beautiful thing. However, the downside is that when you're born into something, and it's so obvious to you, and it's just all you know, you're sort of clouded in a certain way. You're boxed in a certain way. This is the way we think. This is the way we observe things. Whereas if for 40 years, and that's already an adult, you've viewed the world and the universe in many other ways, and then with a very mature mind, you come in fresh to something, you could bring a very fresh, unique, out-of-the-box perspective to something. A bit like what we call the difference between a tzaddik and a Baal Teshuvah. The tzaddik is we call them the FFBs, we call them nowadays, right? From FFBs. And the Baal Teshuvah, often there's so much to learn from such a person because they're appreciating things in ways, or they're discovering or seeing things that the regular FFB may not see or even be sensitive to. So Rabbi Akiva when he walked into the room and he shared his opinion, it was like, whoa, we never even thought about it that way. We weren't trained to think about it that way. We just took it for granted, perhaps, So that was Rabbi Akiva. So, therefore, says Rabbi Yochanan, our Mishnah, the author of our Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva, and the Darish, and his drasha, his source for this is from the teaching that we said, Zman, Zmanam, Zmanihem. From there, he learned that it could also be not just 14 and 15, but also 11, 12, and 13. Abba Chachamim, but the Chachamim, the sages, the majority opinion, plural, disagree. They argue, and they say, "Ein karin Isa ela bizmana." No, that's not true. You can only read the Megillah in its correct time, the 14th and the 15th. We have here now a dissenting opinion. We took it for granted that everybody holds that you can read the Megillah also 11th, 12th, and 13th. The answer is no, it's not true. That's Rabbi Akiva's opinion. That's perhaps the most authoritative opinion. That's the opinion that was expressed anonymously in the Mishnah. But the Chachamim, the sages, disagree, and they say you can only read the Megillah on the 14th and the 15th. We don't give such a dispensation to the villagers. We're going to work through this piece by piece. We have two opinions so far, Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim. And who's teaching us all this? Who is telling us about these two opinions? Rabbi Yochanan. Keep this in mind. Rabbi Yochanan is presenting the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, which is our Mishnah, and then the opinion of the sages, which argue. Meisaveh. Meisaveh is a famous Aramaic word. Meisaveh means they raised an objection. What's the objection? Is as follows. This objection is against who? Against Rabbi Yochanan. Keep this in mind. You, Rabbi Yochanan, are telling me that it's clear-cut two opposing opinions. Rabbi Akiva holds you can read also 11, 12, and 13. Chachamim, the sages, hold you cannot. So the Gemara says, I'm raising an objection against that teaching of Rabbi Yochanan. What's the objection? Because we have a brisa that teaches something as follows. Before I teach this brisa, I want to tell you what a brisa is. What's a brisa? You heard of the word braita? You heard of the word Mishnah? Mishnah you heard. What's the Mishnah? The Mishnah is the work that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Yehuda the prince. By the way, here's another example. What he referred to in the Gemara as Rabbi. The original Rabbi is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. He's called Rebbe because he was the Rebbe. He had in front of him thousands of manuscripts and thousands of teachings for many generations, and he compiled, selected from them, and created the Mishnah. There were many teachings that were not included in the Mishnah. For whatever reason. Not because they were wrong or they were bad, just because they didn't make the cut. But they should be preserved also. So they were preserved. They were preserved in a work called Breita. What does the word Breita in Aramaic mean? Outside. These were works that were left outside of the code of the Mishnah, but they were included in a separate book or separate compilation called Breita. Now, you should know something else. The criteria to be a Tana means a sage of the Talmud. The criteria to being a Tana, or even an Amira, Tana is the sages of the Mishnah, the Amira is the sages of the Gemara. The criteria to be a Tana, if you want to be welcome at this table, there's a criteria. The criteria was you had to be familiar 100% with all the Mishnayot, all the Mishnah teachings. You did not have to be familiar with all the Brisa teachings. And very often you'll see that a sage will say something, and the Gemara will say, what a ridiculous thing. There's a Mishnah, a clear Mishnah that opposes to what you say. And if that's the case, we have no tolerance for your opinion. If, however, there's a Breita that says differently than you, we have tolerance for your opinion. We'll discuss it. We'll have the issue. We'll figure this out. But it doesn't discredit you because you're not obligated to know all the Breitas. Okay? So now Rabbi Yochanan has just told us that it's the following two opinions. Our Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva. You can read 11th, 12th, 13th. Chachamim, the sages, say you cannot. And now the Gemara raises an objection from a Breita, from a teaching that maybe Rabbi Yochanan was not familiar with. What's the objection? As follows. The Breita says, Omer Rabbi Yehuda teaches, a Masai, when is there the law that we give this dispensation to villagers, that they're allowed to read on the 11th, 12th, and 13th? It doesn't apply all the time. It's only unique circumstances. When Bisman Shashanim Ketiknom, when the years are established properly by the Bet Din, by the court, the Yisrael Shurim Bad Al Matan, and the Jews are living in Israel. In other words, during the times of the temple. During the times of the temple, life was organized. Life was settled. There was a clear system how we established the years or the months, as we learned. Witnesses came to the Bet Din, to the court, they testified, the court interrogated, they established its Rosh Chodesh, then they sent messengers out to every town. So there was a good regulation, there was a good control on the system, and all the Jews were living in Israel, and so therefore, you, even if you were living very far away, but at some point, up until 2 weeks afterwards, you would find out the exact days and dates, and you would know about the calendar, you would know when to keep Pesach, for example. But once the temple was destroyed, now we don't have a clear central system. And now we're not sanctifying the new month based on witnesses coming to the court and then the court establishing and then sending out messengers. But rather we're all spread out and we're all dispersed. The many Jews are not living in Israel anymore. Now we got a problem. Now we cannot allow villagers to read the Megillah on 11th, 12th, and the 13th. Why? Now there's a danger. What's the danger? Since people are looking at this practice, in today, nowadays, we can only read it on the original days of the 14th and the 15th and not any earlier. What does that mean? Since people are looking at it, how would people know? You're living in Surah, in Neharda, in Pumbedisa, some town in Iraq, in Babylon. How do you know when to make your Seder for Pesach?
Are you talking in the times of when the temple stood? Or?
Afterwards, once we're in exile. You're living in Rome somewhere. How would you know when to make Pesach? Huh? How do they know? So there used to be a very clear thing. We know that Pesach is exactly 1 month after Purim. Purim is the 14th, and it ends that night. And Pesach is the 15th of Nisan. So we know, count 1 month exactly following Purim, you're going to make the Seder. Okay? That was the sign. Purim was the sign. When we all lived in an organized fashion in Israel, it was okay if villagers read on the 11th, 12th, and 13th. There was no concern that we're going to see this villager read the Megillah on the 12th, count exactly 1 month from there, and then keep Pesach at the wrong time. No, because Bezdin, the court would decide when Rosh Chodesh Nisan is. They would send out messages to the whole of Israel. We would get word of when Rosh Chodesh was before Pesach began. We would begin Pesach on the right time. But now that the temple is over and the system is not organized anymore, and I'm living in the middle of nowhere, I'm never going to find out. The only way I know when Pesach is if I look when we read the Megillah. I see a villager read the Megillah on the 11th, and I assume, well, maybe Pesach is a month after that. I'm going to be eating matzah on the 12th of Nisan. I'm going to be eating chametz 8 days later, which is technically still in the festival of Pesach. Big mistakes are going to happen. So therefore, says Rabbi Yehuda, after the destruction of the temple, we don't allow villagers anymore to read earlier than the 14th and the 15th. Yes.
They can figure out the 11th day of our afternoon after the 15th day of Nisan, one more days to work with. They can't figure out the 15th of Nisan, how they affect the 11th of our.
Right. Good question. So I think there's sort of the general public and there's also individuals. The general public can figure it out. I agree with you. But there were always individuals who were not part of a larger community, who were not part of a system, who didn't have those kinds of connections, didn't come to shul, didn't hear the rabbi's announcements from the pulpit when Pesach is, and went to sell your chametz, whatever. They're not. And they just think about it.
They were on the WhatsApp group.
One on WhatsApp groups, right? Think about it nowadays. Nowadays, the average person, a person who's really not connected very deeply with the Jewish community, how do they know when Pesach is? Maybe some of them are a little more advanced, have a Jewish calendar, some of them don't. Or they're online. A lot of people are not tapped in. And like you told them, Pesach is coming up, really? So soon this year? I didn't realize. Right? Holidays are so soon, I have no idea when it was. They would not know. Unless they were just looking at others or copying others or they heard something. There were going to be people that will make a mistake. There were people that used the method of borrowing from learning from Purim, and they said, yeah, but it's such a nowadays for sure you can appreciate that. So many people just have these symbols. I know that this festival was then, so then I know that my father's yard site is wherever, because I know my father's yard site is 3 days after this. And that's how they work.
Sorry to push this point. How many times do I have a hard time getting to 30 days of the own there? But if these people can make it 30 days from the Pesach, all kavod, it's better than me half the time. So I think that's harder, to be honest.
Right. I hear your point. I think, and this is always the danger when we study nowadays, when we study history, I think when we study history, this is a historical conversation over here. We have to be so careful not to use properties and assumptions of modern day times. You have to put yourself into an age that you're living on your farm, on your village. There's zero communication with anybody outside of a mile of yourself. There's zero technology. How do people stay in touch? How are people aware of certain things? I'm not part of the chevra. I'm not on committees. I'm just a regular layperson living in the middle of nowhere. Put yourself in that kind of situation. It's easy to understand that there were people who just used various symbols for certain things. And my Baba taught me that whenever you have the Purim feast, Pesach is 30 days later. It's something that my Baba taught me and my mother taught me, and I don't know anything more than that. I don't even know dates. I don't know 14th, 15th. I don't know Pesach is the 15th days. I don't even know dates. I don't even know days of the names of the months. I just know what my grandmother taught me, that it's always 30 days later. You have people like that all the time. So Rabbi Yehuda says about these people we're concerned. Okay. Now we have to think about what's going on over here. This brisa teaching of Rabbi Yehuda, that just told us that it depends. During the times of the temple, we did allow villagers to read 11th, 12th, and 13th, but afterwards we don't allow them, and everyone has to read either the 14th or 15th. Who is he going according to? Is that according to Rabbi Akiva or according to the sages that Rabbi Yochanan told us? Huh? Why? And what did the sages say? You can't. You can't. When? They didn't qualify. You can't always. The sages said even during temple times you're not allowed to. They disagree with the whole law. Rabbi Akiva says even during non-temple times you are allowed to. They didn't make these distinctions between different eras. Rabbi Akiva said you can always read earlier. Chachamim said you can never read earlier. Comes along Rabbi Yehuda, we have a teaching, and he says, it depends. During this time you can, during this time you can't. Who's he going according to? Neither of them. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Libademan. Who's Rabbi Yehuda going according to? If you want to say according to Rabbi Akiva, according to Rabbi Akiva, you're allowed to read earlier even nowadays, even after temples destroyed. He said you can always read 11, 12, 13. He has a source. There was no distinction between temple times and post-temple times. So can't be Rabbi Akiva, then who is it? It's according to the sages. Hold on a minute. According to Rabbi Yehuda, when the Jews were living in Israel and everything was organized, you were allowed to read earlier than the 14th and 15th, and the sages said adamantly, you're not allowed to. So you know what the Gemara says? Tiyufta de Rabbi Yochanan Tiyufta. This is a conclusive refutation against the opinion, the teaching of Rabbi Yochanan. Meaning, it's not as harsh as Rabbi Yochanan presented it. Rabbi Yochanan presented that there's two extreme opinions. There's Rabbi Akiva who says you can always read earlier. There's the sages that said you can never read earlier. Now, we were studying here, and we were surprised by this opinion. Never, the Mishnah rules you can, and which is we found out as Rabbi Akiva. And then they tell me there's a chachamim, there's the sages who say you're not allowed to. This was news to us. We just spent a whole page finding out sources from the Megillah, Zman Zmanam Zmanihem, Yamim Kayamim. We spent time and effort trying to figure out the source of where you're allowed to read earlier. And then Rabbi Yochanan introduces to me an opinion of the sages that says you can never read earlier. I imagine everybody here was taken aback. Well, the Gemara says, yeah, you're rightfully so taken aback because that's not true. And we prove it's not true. Because Rabbi Yehuda is the opinion, says a clear opinion in the Brisa that he presents it seems like to be a third opinion, that during the times of the temple you could, but afterwards you couldn't. That's the opinion of the sages. There's no opinion that says you can never read earlier. Because we found clear proof that you can. Zman, Yamim, Kaimim. We have proof for it. There's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva that says you could always read earlier. And there's the other opinion presented by Rabbi Yehuda that it depends. During the temple times, you could, and afterwards you couldn't because he was concerned about this issue of people figuring out the wrong day to keep Pesach. Now, Ryan, just to point out, Rabbi Akiva is not concerned for that. And that's the law. That's the anonymous opinion of our Mishnah. When Rebbe compiled our Mishnah, he quotes the anonymous opinion of Rabbi Akiva. He does not bring the disputing opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. He leaves it out for the Brisa. But the fact is, there was an opinion who said once the temple was destroyed, once it moved to exile, there was a concern about this whole issue of Pesach, and therefore, afterwards, we don't give that dispensation to the villages. It's not the accepted opinion, but it is an opinion. By the way, if you look on the side here, I think it brings an interesting commentary. The third paragraph on the side, since people look to it. So the typical explanation which we gave is people look to the practice of when they're celebrating Purim, and they say a month later is Pesach, and then you can make a whole mistake. Look at the bottom paragraph. Rev Haigo's version of the text reads not mistaklin, people look at it, but rather mistaknin. people endanger themselves from the word sakana. What's the danger of celebrating Purim earlier? He explains that nowadays, when the Jews are subject to persecution, it's better not to add to the days of Purim so as not to intensify the danger. This is also the opinion of the Jerusalem Talmud. Jews used to be very concerned, some Jews still are, concerned about flaunting their Judaism in public. Okay? Once upon a time, rightfully so. Nowadays, I don't think so. But for example, in the past 30, 40 years, there's an ongoing debate amongst the American Jewry. How much should we celebrate and flaunt our Judaism in public? And what is a typical example of that? There's many manifestations of that, but one is Hanukkah's coming up. In Hanukkah, were people like the Chabad Hasidim and the Badr Rebbe who said you've got to put menorahs in public spaces and make big menorah parades and celebrate in public the festival and let everybody know that it's the festival of menorah and the festival of the Jews over the Greeks and light over dark, etc., etc. And it could be a universal message also. But there were many people. When I say many people, I mean both from the right and from the left, meaning ultra-Orthodox Jews on the right and ultra-progressive Jews on the left, who were really, really disappointed and angry with that approach. And they fought hard. When I say fought hard, I mean they took it to the courts. Who took it to the courts? Not just the non-Jews. Jews took it to the courts. It made it to the Supreme Court. You know the whole story?
United States Supreme Court?
United States Supreme Court. Justice Scalia. Olav Shalom. There was a ruling, when was it, in the 80s, 85? I don't remember the exact, there's a whole history behind this. It was Jews that were fighting against this. I'm talking about really progressive Jews, especially. They were opposed to it. They were opposed to this. It doesn't feel nice to see so much Jewish display on the public streets of America, and they had all the arguments and the separations of church and state, etc. All the arguments in the world. In the end, the court ruled in favor of the public menorah. That was a case in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, but this case is everywhere. There's a big menorah on the White House lawn nowadays. Actually, I have friends that visited from New York, and they made a dinner last night in a restaurant, and I was visiting, and so I met a girl there. I can mention some information on the screen without mentioning her name. She's from Litchfield. Litchfield is actually where my cousin Rabbi Eisenbach is the Chabad rabbi there, and I met Litchfield is in Connecticut, very nice city in Connecticut. And I mentioned Rabbi Eisenbach, he's my cousin. So she said, "Oh boy." So she didn't divulge too much information, other than she says, "I don't know him personally, but 20 years ago when he moved there, he had the menorah saga, right? It's a typical Chabad profile thing. You move to a city, Hanukkah is coming, you plan to put a menorah up in the front of town square, and the people of the city get all angry with you, and they sue you in court, and then you go to court, and eventually, and the Supreme Court ruling comes out, and it's like a lost battle nowadays. People still try to fight the battle, but it's a lost battle. So 20 years ago, her mother, she tells me, she was the biggest opponent against the Chabad menorah on the streets, and it went to court, and it was a whole fight, and she lost the fight, and he won the fight. I told her, I said, listen, just tell your mother one thing. The menorah battle is over. It still goes on, but it's over. There's no hope in ever winning it here in America anymore. Find a different battle if you want to start a fight, but don't use the menorah fight. It's just you're wasting your time. But anyhow. Where are we? How do we even get into all this? The refutation of Rabbi Yochanan. Yeah, we just refuted his opinion.
Sorry, you're refuting the fact that the Mishnah
that the sage's opinion is not as extreme as we thought, as he presented it. It's not that they said there was never such a law that the villagers cannot read 11th or 13th. That's not true. There was such a law, and that essentially is the law. And during the temple times, they could read earlier. After the temple was destroyed, they were those that were of the opinion that we should not apply that law anymore because of the concern of others getting the wrong message when Pesach will be, for example. Oh, yeah, did that answer your question?
I think so. So really, that's what the Talmud said. That's what they said.
That's what they said, and not the way that Rabbi Yochanan presented it. Correct. I was talking about the Rav Haigo's opinion, the danger. right? So one time it was dangerous to celebrate, in the streets, people getting dressed up, giving out mishloach manot, and you want to minimize that. So keep it to one day. If you start allowing Jews to disrupt the city, 11th, 12th, 13th, you're going to annoy the neighbors and they're going to lose patience with you. And especially if you're going to have the music blaring all night and people getting drunk for 4 nights in a row, etc., you're really going to endanger. So therefore, the opinion was just keep it to one day. Don't keep it to don't add more days to it.
So is that the halacha?
No. The halacha is that it still can be read, like our Mishnah says, 11th of the 13th, but we're going to qualify this soon. What did I want to say? Yeah.
Is there a concept of presuming this off for
Yes, of course.
So then why would I bring something that's kind of the opposite, that you're trying to quell?
Why would who?
I think that you're shopping.
Yeah.
I said that you should limit.
Well, that was a concern for Jewish life. That overrides. All right, let me conclude with a little story. Talking about Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was such a hero? What made him so refreshing? Rabbi Akiva, the Gemara has many stories, how he was a source of hope and a source of life and a source of light. Where others saw darkness, he saw light. And there's a number of stories. I think one story we've told many times about when he lived during a transitional time. He lived during the end of the Second Temple and the destruction of the temple, and then the beginning of exile. And that was a very difficult time in Jewish history. And I think I've told the story before about he was traveling with the sages. They saw the temple in ruins. They all cried. He laughed. I don't know if you know that story. Why did he laugh? And they cried. But there's another story that I'll show you with a good message. So the Gemara says a story that once Rabbi Akiva was going shopping for meat in the meat market together with Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua. Why were they shopping for meat? Because Rabbi Gamliel was getting ready to marry off his son. And Rabbi Akiva says we were in the middle of the meat market. And what do people talk about in the meat market? What do you talk about when you're shopping in Costco with your friends? Well, this is what, so this is what Rabbi Akiva spoke about. Talking about Costco, I just learned recently, I want to check it out, but apparently Costco, I don't shop that much, but is it true that they reorganize their shelves and the locations of foods every so often?
Yeah. Yes.
They do. You know why? It's such a brilliant business move.
So you find something.
So you spend more time in the store because you have to look for the thing again. It's not where and automatically you're buying more things. There's a science behind this. Geniuses, unbelievable. Okay, that's a lesson in Costco. I shall change the shul location, the Shabbat mini in different locations every week, so people are searching. And where's the shul this week? And where do we go? Pick up more Jews,
If I go to Costco with my wife, we spend more. So I don't know.
Okay, so Rabbi Akiva says, I have a question for my dear friends. My question is, why does the Torah say that when Yaakov was moving with his family, remember, and then he left some things on the other side of the river, he goes to the other side of the river, he has a battle with the angel, and then the Torah says, Vayizrach lo hashemesh, and the sun rose for him. Why does the Torah say the sun rose for him? When the sun rises for everybody. It doesn't just rise for you. I mean, some people, like a narcissist, wakes up in the morning and says, the sun rose for me today. It's not true. It also rose for me as well. So that was his question in Costco. So
Costco?
Well, in the meat market. Yeah. So he says, I'll tell you the answer. The same sun that set for him also rose for him. Meaning, many years earlier, he was running away from his home because Esau wanted to kill him, and he was running to his uncle in Haran, and he was reaching Haran to Lavan's house, and then he realizes, I passed by Har HaMoriah, I passed by the Temple Mount, where the temple is going to be built one day, and I didn't even stop there to make a prayer. That's the place where Abraham brought Yitzchak to Shech for the Akedah. I passed by the holy place, and I didn't stop there. I didn't make a prayer there. I want to go back there. Hashem made a miracle and folded the land underneath him, meaning he had Kfitzat HaDerech, he had a shortening of the path, and right away he found himself on the Temple Mount. He was there, he made a prayer, and he said, okay, now I've prayed, I'm ready to go to my uncle's house in Haran. Hashem said, you came here, you're not going to spend the night here. At least spend the night, right? But he wasn't planning on spending the night, he was planning to continue traveling. So what did Hashem do? Hashem, and there's a verse in the Torah for this, Hashem made the sun set all of a sudden. It set early. So it should get dark, he can't travel, and then he sleeps there. And that's the whole episode when he puts the rocks around his head that the Torah talked about. I'm telling you the back end of the story. We're going to read it in a couple of weeks, next week. So the stars or the orbits were misaligned because the sun set earlier than normal, which shifted everything in the skies. Well, a big problem, big crisis. So Hashem said, oh, I'm going to make it up one day. When is that? Later, I'm going to make the sun rise at its abnormal time for him because the sun, right, set for him. And that was Rabbi Akiva's teaching. Nice?
Wait. Who did it rise early for?
Yaakov.
Oh.
Also Yaakov. Say Yaakov. There's a beautiful commentary. What's Rabbi Akiva sharing this? What's the point of his teaching? And what's he sharing it in the meat market? And they were shopping for the wedding of Rabbi Gamliel's son. This wasn't just any wedding. Who was Rabbi Gamliel? Rabbi Gamliel comes from the house of David. Rabbi Gamliel was established Jewish leadership, so much so that we know one day Mashiach will come from this family. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was taken out of Jerusalem and given, to meet Vespasian when they were besieged and about to be destroyed, and he managed to find favor in Vespasian's eyes, and Vespasian offered him 3 requests. One request was, give us Yavna, at least we can set up a Jewish academy there, give doctors for Rabbi Tzadok, and I want you to spare the family of Rabbi Gamliel. Why? Because he's important to us. His family is the family of leadership, the family of Mashiach. That's Rabbi Gamliel. Now Rabbi Gamliel's son is getting married, which means, remember, this transitional time, the temple has just been destroyed. Jews don't even know if there's going to be a future to Judaism. If you could think about somebody being liberated from Auschwitz, from Buchenwald, their whole family been destroyed, the first thing in that person's mind, possibly, is there even a future? Will Judaism return? Will there be something called Judaism and Torah and synagogues and Jewish community? No one has any idea. At that point, no one knew there's a future. Rabbi Gamliel also didn't know. Now he's marrying off his son. What's the point? Is there going to be a future to this whole thing? Am I wasting my time? So Rabbi Akiva saw this anxiety or this angst in the eyes of Rabbi Gamliel, and he said, I want to tell you something. And he shared this teaching. You know what he was saying with this teaching? Suns do set. For every sun that sets, the sun rises again. The sun has set, appears to have set on the Jewish people. It's a state of darkness. Millions of Jews were massacred. Millions of Jews were exiled. We've lost our land. We've lost our city of Jerusalem. We've lost the temple. We've lost our sovereignty. We've lost everything. It's unclear where we're even holding right now, what the future lies. But you should know that every time the sun sets, the sun rises. Rabbi Akiva said, I see with my eyes closed, I can see there'll be a time that once again there'll be old people and young people dancing in the streets of Jerusalem. I can see it happening. I can see life returning to our holy city. What's happening right now, Rabbi Akiva saw this 2,000 years ago, at a time when nobody believed it. Who would believe that one day we're going to be back in the land of Jerusalem and land of Israel? Nobody would believe it. You got to be crazy to believe that. It's happening in front of our eyes. And it's going to happen even more, Yerushalayim Abnuyah, when it's going to be the rebuilding when Mashiach will come. So Rabbi Akiva saw that. And that's how he brought hope to Rabbi Gamliel. Go to your son's wedding. Your son will be the progeny and it will continue to build your family. And there will be a time where things will change. It'll be a rocky history as it's been, but it'll end well. That's Rabbi Akiva for us. Shkoach. A good night, everybody.
Thank you.